summer meeting of the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. Quickly go through introductions and then we'll move along with business on the agenda. It's a pretty full agenda today. Obviously to my right is Chris Hauber, the Executive Director, Tony Wilkinson, Bill Bruce, Mike Lyons, Steve Rice, Rick Georgeson, John Brust, Don Sapos, Harvey Alexander, and Larry Eckhouse. Welcome, everyone.
Good job. Good morning. Good job.
Has everyone on the commission had an opportunity to review the minutes from our March meeting? And is there any need for change or addition? Okay, I'll accept the motion to...
Motion.
Second. Okay. All in favor of accepting the minutes from the March meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Okay, they're accepted. We'll begin with an opportunity for receiving comments from the public. Is there anyone who wishes to make a statement or offer comments? Yes, sir. If you could just stand up and identify yourself, that'd be great. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Jerome Bentley. I live at 103 Willow Street in Gilderland. How is everyone this morning?
Good morning.
Have you had an opportunity, as you, Mr. Hauber, I'm addressing, have you had an opportunity to address the board as to the nature of our meeting last week?
I have. I sent out a communication before this meeting with a copy of the letter that we received and some quick background, yes, and a map.
Is it reasonable for me to believe that everyone sitting at this center dais is therefore aware of the difficulties some of the Willow Street residents have had in the previous 3 years? And the nature of our concern and what we believe to be the cause?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask questions?
No, this is an opportunity for public comment.
Okay. Again, I'm not sure that I know how to proceed. I understand that I didn't think I'd be able to ask questions. More have arisen since we had an opportunity to meet last week. We've received no written correspondence as of yet. We didn't, for example, have an opportunity to see what you folks received. I wonder if we might be able to get that. A list of email addresses of the concerned residents were provided to the Pine Bush. Is that something we might receive?
If you want to receive information that the commission is authorized to release, yes, you can receive that. All you have to do is request it.
Okay. I have faith in you at this time. That you're going to follow through with the things that you said you would do for us when we met last week, which is essentially to look into it. We are people who have lived in our homes in some cases for many decades. These basements were not merely devoid of water, they were bone dry, not even damp. In the last 3 years, particularly this spring, we have found ourselves living in Venice with no pizza, no gondolas, and none of the atmosphere that Italy provides. I'm making a joke, but as I'm sure you can understand, mold and mildew and the effect of a wet basement on the value of a home, it is a most serious situation, and one that we hope that you can look into and resolve as quickly as possible.
Thank you, sir. Any other person from the public wishing to offer comment? No? Okay. Thank you, sir. We'll move on to reports. The only item that I have for reporting at this point is on June 7th, I think it was the first prescribed burn of the year. Is that right, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. The commission performed a 14-acre prescribed burn, and everything went well with that burn. The commission's burn expert, burn leader, what's his title?
Fire Management Specialist.
Fire Management Specialist, I'm sorry.
Brandon Clifford.
He's now dispatched to Texas to help out the U.S. Forest Service, and he'll be down in Texas approximately through the end of the month. So that's about all I've got right now in the way of reports for the commission. Are there any commission members who have reports they wish to offer? No? We'll turn it right over to Chris then for any reports he has.
Okay. There's some media coverage that you might be interested in. I don't know. Some of it you received from Margie as part of your board packet. Others maybe not, but the Pine Bush Commission, the first time, or the Albany Pine Bush Preserve itself, was noted in the business review under tourism and attractions, number 10. 75,000 people visiting per year. I can pass that around if people are interested. And I want to thank Margie and Wendy for helping to make that happen. I'll thank Wendy for making this happen. This is a quarterly magazine in the Times Union that comes out on Sundays. We are one of the top 5 summer's best places to visit, which is nice. And in today's Capital Region paper,
Top 3 according to that.
top 3 or number 3. We're within the top 5, we'll take third spot. And then we have Emily Piper, who is a seasonal staff member of ours.
Speech.
She won't say a word. Who is shown on the cover here at the Capital Region section doing butterfly monitoring work. She was unhappy because the media didn't get her quote quite accurate, if you can imagine. And then there's an article in here about the presentation that we're going to hear from the 2 Union College professors. So that was nice coverage this morning. Let's see. I'd like to also introduce Sarah Poggi. She's our new environmental educator. That position has been vacant. That position was filled up until about February, and it has been vacant since. So we're really happy to have Sarah with us. She has quite a bit of experience in environmental education, a master's in environmental ed, and she's been doing a lot of work already. We have a finalized lease with the Nature Conservancy for another 5 years. I just received that back, and I will be signing that, or Gina will be signing that on behalf of the commission. So that's good. Let's see. The Lupin Fest. We had our 5th annual Lupin Fest here the weekend before Memorial Day. We had the most people we've ever had, probably because we had good weather, which helped. We had close to 750 people. This room was the specific focus of some exhibitors, art exhibitors that had their own artwork here, specifically showing paintings, drawings, or other illustrations of pine bush habitat, which is pretty nice. We had music, we had family activities, we had Betty's cupcake bus here. And Betty seemed to do very well, which is good. And then 2 other final things. You may hear a helicopter when you're leaving today. The DEC Rangers are performing training, helicopter sling training today in the Pine Bush Preserve off of Willow Street. And they are doing that as practice for search and rescue as part of their mission. And it's rangers from across the state coming here. So they use the Pine Bush as a place that's close to the airport, but can simulate a wildland situation. And then finally, we received a letter in March, shortly after our board meeting in March, from the Office of the State Controller, indicating that we are considered a public authority under the Public Authorities Law, and asked for some general information, who the contact is, our address, things like that. So we sent that back and are awaiting their response to tell us how we have to comply with it. Much of what we do now, we're already in compliance. And Larry, our counsel, Larry Eckhouse, did an analysis for us even before we got this letter back in December, assuming that we probably would be considered a public authority coming down the road. So I think we're in pretty good shape. Is there anything you want to add, Larry? I think we're...
No, I think we pretty much expected it, and although everyone cringes whenever they hear public authority, oh my God, what do you have to do? But really, I think that Pine Bush is probably one of the. I've dealt with a lot of nonprofits in my life, and I've never seen a better organization. And I think we've got a lot of what the public authority law requires is already being done in one form or another. And there may be some reporting that has to be done in a certain manner that's a little bit different, but the information is there. So I don't think it would be that onerous to comply.
Okay. And I didn't go through the update, the green update in your packet. I usually go through that, but in the respective time, I'd ask you to take a look at it because there's a lot of things that went on in the last quarter with our staff here at the Preserve and at the Discovery Center, as usual. So I didn't want to be remiss in pointing that out. That's all I have.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes.
Okay, Neil's next with the executive, or the technical committee report, rather.
Good morning.
Thanks. Thanks, Neil.
The technical committee has met a couple of times since the last commission meeting. Project review continues to be slow. This update outlines all of the active projects that the commission has reviewed and commented on. All of these you've seen before. They're still open projects with each of the municipalities, except for one. There was a small 5-acre subdivision, five lot subdivision rather, in the town of Gilderland that we commented on in a relative protection area 80, partial protection area 80, and the subdivision was right on the periphery of that in a pretty developed area, so it was likely to have minimal impacts, and we simply commented that they should do the things that we normally request, like native plant landscaping and appropriate exterior lighting and buffer a dune that's out there, but that was largely it. The landfill habitat restoration project is largely on hold as a result of some permitting issues, and we await resolution of some of that so the city can and the commission can move forward on restoring some preserved land. And I'll leave it at that unless you have questions.
Is there any idea how long it's going to be on hiatus?
No. No. The Army Corps of Engineers has been saying in a week for about a year. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a matter between the city and the Corps of Engineers at this point. Thank you, Neil. Next, we'll hear from Mike Venuti with a report on the Discovery Center.
Good morning. Just a few updates to report. In an ongoing effort to provide accessible trails in the areas around the Discovery Center, FlexiPave, a porous product comprised of recycled tires, was installed in between the planters in front of the building during the past month, creating a nice loop system around the planters. And again, to improve accessibility, an application of crusher run was installed along the south side of the Discovery Loop. This trail surface will accommodate both pedestrians and the vehicles used for resource management in the preserve. Changing gears, the history of the Wrap Road community, sponsored by the Friends of the Pine Bush community and funded by the Fender Foundation, is now complete. And we are expecting the delivery of the software and hardware in about 2 hours. So that will be up and running today. Effective July 1st, we have a new cleaning firm for the building. It's called Building Care Systems, and they will be servicing the building for the next year through Carroll Real Estate Services. Other planned projects within the building include the replacement of the exterior security cameras and all of the smoke detectors on the first and second floor. We are also looking at design work for the installation of porous pavement along the existing access road behind the building, and the possible installation of FlexiPave along the remaining section of the Discovery Trail. And finally, as you can see, the Discovery Center school program attendance is going strong, and the Friends Transportation Assistance Program continues to be an asset to the qualified school districts. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike. Next, we'll have Allison give us the financial report.
Good morning. The financial report is on the cream-colored sheets of your packet. And this is for the fiscal year 2012, the first month ending April 30th of 2011. When Wojcicki and Company presents the audit, you'll hear the full financial results of fiscal year 2011. So again, this is for just the 1 month of April 30th. So year to date is 1 month of the 12-month budget. The budget for the full year is in column D. Dues and contributions, it was an estimated budget of 500. We brought in 100, which is on track. Our government's grants and contracts, that is also on track because it relates directly to our expenses. So if we didn't have as many expenses during the month, we wouldn't have put in as much for receivable. The investment income of $5,400 is estimated of about 3%, and we did not draw from the investment income during April. Our lease revenue is at 100%, And our other revenue, which includes the school program fees, public program fees, and our gift shop, was just over 100%, bringing the total revenue for the month of April to $124,000, or 72% for the month's budget. Going under expenses, our personal and fringe was below budget at 66%. Travel and training was also below budget at 30%. Our contractual expenses was below budget at 55%. Communications was pretty close to target at 87%. Occupancy was at 59%. Some of this had to do with lower utility costs, as well as some Barron House repairs that were actually done in March instead of April. Supplies and equipment, again, that was at 20%. Some of those supplies and equipment was purchased at the end of fiscal year 11 in March, so they will not be realized during this fiscal year, and some of them will be purchased in future months. Other expenses, which includes bank fees and charges, insurance, other miscellaneous expenses, was below budget at 15%. Our total expenses for the month were about $127,000, or 57%, so we almost had pretty close net even budget for the month of April, which is good for the first month of the fiscal year. Are there any questions? Moving on to the balance sheet, or the statement of net assets. Again, this is for our position as of April 30th, 2011. The column B, fiscal year 2011, was as of March 31st. So column A, which is fiscal year 2012, our cash and cash equivalents was about $760,000, of which some of those funds are going to be moved into our conservation and land reserves, which is the next line, line 2, which is at $444,000. Our grants receivable was at $212,000. A small portion of that was for the remaining receivable at the end of fiscal year 2011, and the difference is what we had spent during April. Accounts receivable is our mitigation check of $89,000. That came in just at the beginning of May, so that has already been cleared to zero. Inventory at $9,000. Our investments grew during the month of April to almost 3.3, and the building was the same at about 4.775. Excuse me. Our accounts payable and accrued expenses went down to about $57,000. That's primarily due to our accrued expenses. For the year ending March, we had the largest number of accrued expenses we could have because of the way our payroll fell. And during the month of April, we had the smallest number of days of accrued expenses that you could have. So that's the majority difference between those two numbers. We did not have any deferred revenue, and our net assets didn't change that much. So we had a total net asset of $9.5 million at the end of April. Are there any questions? Our investment summary, again, this is just for 1 month. The annualized rate, I annualize on our fiscal year, so again, that rate is only for 1 month. Our reserve fund beginning balance was just over $760,000, and the ending balance was just below $780,000, with a rate of return of about 2.3%. That has now increased since we've invested in the TIPS that we talked about in December, or I'm sorry, in March. Discovery and Center endowment, beginning balance was $76,000, ending was at $78,000 for just over 2.4%. Our endowment was started the year at $2.37 million and ended April at just over $2.43 million for a 2.5% return. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. We're going to flip items 5 and 6 because Matt Lindeman from Wojcicki and Company is here to lead a discussion on our 2010/11 audit. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Gene. I understand everyone has we have 3 documents that we issued as a result of our audit engagement, and they should be in your materials. Just to introduce myself, my name is Matt Lindeman. I'm an audit partner at Wojcicki and Company, a CPA firm over in East Greenbush, New York. We have a staff of about 35, and this is the 3rd year that we have been the Commission's auditors. We came in early May to conduct the audit of the Commission's financial statements, which the year end we audited was 3/31/2011. Excuse me. Earlier in June, I believe it was June 2nd, after we completed our audit and had issued draft reports, we made a complete presentation to the Finance Committee, and that meeting probably ran about an hour, hour and a half or so. So we had a thorough vetting of the reports by the Finance Committee, in addition to management at the Commission, to get to what you have in front of you today. Of the three documents, I'm going to talk, I know you received them in advance, so I'll talk through them very quickly and just hit a couple of the highlights. The first letter is directed to the Board of Directors. It's a required communication between us as auditors and you as the Board of Directors charged with governance of the organization. A couple key points in that letter, and I think that's relevant to the board, is the fact that there's a subheading in there, difficulties encountered in performing the audit. We did not have any as auditors. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. As part of our audit process, we go through and we check the numbers. Our responsibility as auditors is to make sure that the financial statements prepared by management are correct in all material respects. And in that regard, if we find something that needs to be adjusted, we'll propose an adjustment. We did make a couple adjustments. They were relatively minor in terms of dollar amount and the nature of the adjustments. Nothing that out of the ordinary, nothing that we haven't, adjustments that were similar in nature to those that we had proposed in previous years. And I believe that's important to you as a board, in that Allison comes up and makes a presentation and you're seeing financial information on a monthly basis. What you get on a monthly basis is by and large accurate. We did not make a whole bunch of adjustments at the end of the year to get to these final audited numbers. So again, disagreements with management. We didn't have any disagreements with management about treatment of items or how to record things or not record things. And we really had no other findings or issues in our audit. And that's the first report I have, which is the report to the Board of Directors. The second document that should be in your packet as well is the financial statements and compliance report. And this is really the kind of the meat and potatoes of our engagement. I'm not going to go through all 20 pages, but I will hit a couple of the important items in here. And I would direct you to page 5 first, which is the independent auditor's report. That's our report, Wojcicki & Company's report on the Commission's financial statements. And if you just jump down to the third paragraph, that's the opinion paragraph, where we say that it's what's termed an unqualified opinion or a clean opinion, where we're saying that the financial statements are correct in all material respects. So it's a clean opinion. It's the same opinion that the Commission's had for the last couple of years, at least has ever had to my knowledge, and it's what you want to have. The statements that follow, I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights, which are also included in management's discussion and analysis, which starts on page 1. Total assets, audited numbers, March 31st, 2010 versus March 31st, 2011. Total assets of the organization increased by over $400,000 on a year-over-year basis. The revenue over expenses for the period, for the 2011 fiscal year, revenues exceeded the expenses by about $500,000 year over year, or during the year. And the fund balance, which is essentially if you took all of the organization's assets and had the ability to convert them to cash and paid off all the liabilities of the organization, the fund balance at the, that would be what's left. Fund balance is a little over $9 million, about $9.2 million. So it's a financially healthy organization. Again, there are a couple items in the, it is a very lengthy document. The footnotes to all the statements begin on page 11. Basically, all of the disclosures that are in here, the note disclosures which supplement what's in the financial statements, are included here. But the Commission follows generally accepted accounting principles, and And all of the related policies, accounting policies of the organization are outlined in here. The last thing that I will point to in this document sits way back on page 19, which is a report on compliance. Whenever we audit, conduct an audit in accordance with government auditing standards, you have to issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters. This two-page report is essentially, again, a clean report on those two items. So it's exactly what you would expect to have, and what you would like to have as a board of directors and as an organization. We didn't find any material weaknesses. We didn't find any significant deficiencies in internal control, and that's outlined in this report on pages 19 and 20. The last report I have is a report to management. And although we did not find any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that would need to be reported under government auditing standards, we do, as we go along through our process, we typically find a few things that maybe the organization could be doing a little better. As you're aware, this year, the entire accounting function was brought back in-house. Prior to that, TNC was used, and NHT was used, and now the entire function has been brought back in-house. So in light of that, we did take a very close look at the internal controls within the organization, how funds were dispersed, how monies were received, etc., layers of approval. And I'm not going to go through each one of these comments. I think you might have an action item on at least one of these coming. But we did have a few comments, and we made a few recommendations to both management and the finance committee in that more detailed presentation that we had back a couple weeks ago in early June. So that letter is there as well. And if there are any questions about the audit, management letter, or the other report that I spoke about, I'd be happy to take it. If not.
Matt, my only request would be, since this leads into our action item, if you would just go to the report that discusses investment policy and the recommendations you're making with respect to that.
Yeah, sure. One of the things that we test for, not only do we audit the balances and make sure that the balances of the investments that are being reported to you are correct by confirmation of third party, we also take a look at your investment policy and make sure that the investments as invested by your custodians actually adhere to the policy that the board has set. So the policy is specific in how the assets in certain funds are supposed to be allocated between cash, mutual funds, stocks, etc. We tested what was there at March 31st, 2011 versus what the policy guidelines stated. And we also did the same thing in last year's audit and had a similar comment that the investments as they existed at March 31st were not completely in compliance in terms of those asset allocations that were delineated in your own policy. So the comment that Gene just alluded to is, we had a couple suggestions. Either, change the policy if you think that you can do better with your investments by changing the policy and like that composition, then you could do that. Or you sell out of one set of investments and bring your portfolio into compliance with the policy. So that's where that comment came from.
Thank you, Matt. Anybody have any other questions or comments for Matt's report? Thank you very much, Matt. We appreciate it. So now you'll see why we flipped the topics. We expected that Matt's discussion would be a good lead-in to our action item, which is to consider updating or altering our investment policy. One of the things that our discussions and reviews with Matt produced was, among members of the Finance Committee, a recognition that we think our investment policy, as currently stated, is probably a bit restrictive We adopted it in that way intentionally, on purpose at the beginning, because you know, as Matt alluded to, we've gone through a transition, a couple of them actually, and you know, we're now exercising greater independence and control over our financial assets than we ever have. And we wanted to adopt controls at the outset that would provide a pretty restrictive level of control over how we address those investments. We're at the point now, however, where we think that as a result, partly of Wojcicki and Company's audit, that we think we need to consider loosening that to some extent to allow us to gain a greater return of our assets than what we're getting. So, Chris, I'll use that as a lead-in to any discussion you want to have on that.
Sure. So if you want to take a look at action item A in your packet, it's the blue resolution. And the consideration is to change, and I'll show you exactly where it is in the statement of investment policy that follows, to change the cash equivalents to a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 50%, and fixed income a minimum of 50% and a maximum of 100% in investments for reserves. So if you flip back, the investment policy follows that blue page. If you go to page 8 of the investment policy, you see there's 3 tables, and the top table says reserves. There's cash equivalents, which is now 50, minimum of 50 and a maximum of 100. Fixed income is a minimum of 0 and 50. So the resolution basically just flips those. So you have more investments in fixed income, which has a slightly higher risk, but a considerably higher return. So basically what we did is when we made the decision to invest in TIPS, which Allison mentioned, and that was at the recommendation of our investment manager at Key, it is now grown to the point where we've exceeded our investment policy. So it's a good thing. And the risk is very low if we change it. And I don't know if anybody from the Finance Committee wants to, because we had a conversation about this after the presentation. No? If there's any questions?
I mean, in short, what we're doing here with this proposal to alter the existing investment policy is to take into consideration and act upon the recommendations we've received independently from both Key Bank as well as Wojcicki and Company. This is designed to ensure that we're maximizing the return and the value that we get from our cash or cash equivalents. Because right now, we're not realizing anywhere near the rate of return that we ought to be.
I'm assuming everybody on the financial committee was agreeing with this?
Yeah, we met, as Matt mentioned, earlier this month, and we had a pretty robust discussion about this. And yeah, clearly, I think there was no one on the committee that believes that the rate of return we're getting right now on our cash or cash equivalents is you know, within reason. We should be doing better. If there's no discussion, then I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to move by action item or A for a vote.
I'll move that.
Second? Okay. All in favor of adopting action item A, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, thank you. Action item A is adopted unanimously. Next, we'll move on to what ought to be a very interesting presentation.
Oh, Chief, one thing, I'd just like to jump in. Congratulations, Allison. We've gone through a lot of changes, and once again, we came through an audit very smoothly. Congratulations.
Yes.
Good job.
Yeah. Nice job. Thanks.
You're not here.
Oh, they're not here yet. Okay.
So the 2 professors that we have coming to present from Union, they're on the schedule for 10:45. We're way ahead. And I suggested to them that we might be ahead, we might not, you know how that works. So I asked them to be here around 10:25 if they could be here for 10:30. So I guess there's two options. There's basically three things we need to discuss in executive session. We could go into executive session and discuss one of the topics, specifically the real property topic that we discussed last time, and then come back out for 10:30 for the presentation, or we can just simply take a break. And it's a 20-minute break.
Why don't we, I'd suggest we try to accomplish something in the next 20 minutes. So we'll address as much of the agenda for the executive session as we can in the time that's allowed before the professors from Union arrive. Yeah, okay. So if everyone that wishes to see this presentation, and I would urge you to stick around for it, it'll be very good. If you want to just, mingle in the lobby, take something out to, chew on, that's fine as well. Appreciate that. Motion. Oh yeah, and we need a motion to go into executive session. Second. Okay. All in favor of moving into executive session, please say aye. Aye. Okay. Any opposed, say nay. Okay. We'll go into executive session. Thanks.
Primarily on tick-borne diseases, and Dr. Schmidt is an economist, and he focuses primarily on public economics. So they're going to give a presentation. I first saw this at the Northeast Natural History Conference. We had a whole session that Neil Gifford organized for the Pine Bush for a half a day at the museum, and it's a fantastic presentation. And you saw the article in today's TU. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I also want to give some recognition to Scott Morlando, our co-author, who isn't here right now. Scott was a student at Union, graduated in 2008, and he did a lot of the work that we're going to be telling you about today. So I think everybody here is pretty familiar with the Pine Bush, right, and the system. So I just want to start by giving you a little background about how we got onto this. I am a straight-up ecologist. I go out and collect ticks and small mammals and big mammals and other things and think about disease ecology of tick-borne diseases. And economics is not something that I think about very often. But Scott, who was a student that I knew fairly well, came to me in his junior year and said that he was trying to put together a thesis project that would combine his two majors. He was a double major in environmental studies and economics. And could I come up with something and help him come up with a project? And I spoke to him for a half hour in my office and nodded and smiled. And I knew that when he left, I knew that I was not going to be able to come up with anything appropriate because I'm not an economist and I don't, I guess, think that way, or I didn't before we got into this project. So I smiled to Scott and told him to leave and that I'd get back to him if I could think of anything. And he left, and the next day in the Schenectady Gazette, there was an article about the Woodlawn Preserve, which you can see here at the top of the screen. Here's the, more or less, the water tower, the Pine Bush Preserve. So the Woodlawn Preserve is a chunk of land, primarily in Schenectady County, owned by the county, that is remnant pine bush habitat that has been kicked around for a number of years without anybody really knowing what to do with it. And they had just reached a decision not to sell it to a developer to develop into a whole bunch of houses. And so the idea, this led me through this chain of thought, where I thought, well, I wonder if there are as many ticks in the Woodlawn Preserve as there are in parts of the pine bush. And I wonder what would happen if they tried to remediate the tick problem, or the degraded habitat in the Woodlawn Preserve. And that led me to thinking, I wonder what kind, how could we test this? It would cost a lot of money to remediate. Is there any way that we could justify the remediation or the habitat restoration based on reduction in disease risk? And then that was the aha moment where I thought, wait, they've already done this at the Albany pine bush. They have restored habitat in many places by removing the black locust. Is there a way that we could look to see if what kind of impact that had on disease risk, and whether that could in some way justify the costs of the remediation? So that got us started. Scott was lucky enough to end up with Steve Schmidt as an advisor in on the economics side of it. And so the three of us have worked together for quite a while, starting with Scott's thesis and then going well beyond after he graduated. So here's just another picture of the Woodlawn Preserve, but that's where we leave the Woodlawn Preserve because And its fate is still up in the air. There was recently another article in the paper about the Woodlawn Preserve, unfortunately. But it brought us to the idea of the economics of restoration. And this is a well-known problem, that the costs of restoration are very easily quantified. How much do you have to pay the contractor to stabilize the banks, remove the trees, do whatever it is that you're having done? That's easy. Somebody has to write the check. Someone has to pay the money. We know how much it costs. But the benefits of restoration are notoriously difficult to quantify because they end up being in terms of things like ecosystem services, flood control, water quality, air quality, reduction in erosion, for example. These are things that no one can own. There's a very broad public good that comes from them, but they can't be bought and sold on the marketplace, so they're very hard to put dollar and cent numbers on. So it really appears that there's a need, as much as possible, a need for things that can have concrete, we can put dollars and cents numbers on, that have concrete benefits. And that's where this idea of this novel benefit, which is the number of cases of tick-borne disease averted. And of course, here's the famous bullseye rash from Lyme disease. So is this a problem around here? Yes, it definitely is, and it appears to be a growing problem. You can see here, Albany, Schenectady, and Saratoga, the number of Lyme disease cases has really gone straight up in the last 10 years, and it's not expected to abate. This would look very modest if we had Rensselaer County, or particularly Columbia County or Dutchess County on here, which are much, much higher. And nevertheless, this area has really seen a huge increase in the number of cases of Lyme disease. And from an economic standpoint, we're talking about Lyme disease because it's a disease that's extremely well studied. So we know a lot about how much it costs and how many cases there are, et cetera. But there are a number of tick-borne diseases, human granulocytic anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Powassan virus, all vectored by the same ticks, which are black-legged ticks, Ixodes scapularis. These are all diseases that are increasing dramatically in prevalence and in the number of cases. And we don't have them incorporated here, but if we could, it would be hard, but if we could, it would show that this was in fact has a much larger impact than we're reporting. Another thing is veterinary cases of Lyme disease and all these tick-borne diseases. We spend billions of dollars as a society on our pets, and many of them end up with Lyme disease and are expensive to treat. So this idea of tick-borne disease risk, why did we suspect that the habitat restoration, the removal of the black locust trees is what we're talking about now. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that. Why did we think that this would reduce Lyme disease risk? And it's just, it's the physiology of the tick. This particular species of tick, Ixodes scapularis, is very desiccation intolerant. They can't take really dry conditions. So the removal of the trees, the black locust, conditions in the black locust, very moist, mesic conditions, grasslands and savannas tend to be much drier. Everybody's familiar with this kind of picture. Here's the black locust invaded site, and here's the savanna-like open site, much drier, grassland area with trees, dotted with trees essentially, and shrubs. And this is it's essentially was very well known among ecologists that this kind of habitat, the open habitat, is much lower, has much lower tick numbers, tick densities. So we predicted, kind of knowing what we were going to find, but we predicted that we would, the restored areas would have lower tick densities, and that would, of course, translate into lower disease risk. So to quantify the impact of the whole thing, first we counted ticks. Scott did this to estimate reduction in disease risk. And then we used cost of illness studies, which essentially people have gone out. We used those that were already published, where people will talk to doctors and healthcare administrators, look at patient records, and determine what the risks are of developing diseases to certain level, and then how much these things cost. And Steve will talk about that a little more in a few minutes. And then we estimated the reduction in the risk of tick-borne diseases and the benefit of the Lyme disease cases averted. So we use the density of ticks as a metric for the Lyme disease, the change in Lyme disease risk. To do this, with Neil Gifford's help, we identified 3 sites that were black locust invaded, completely invaded by black locust, and 3 sites that were restored, so sites that they had removed black locust and restored the native habitat. Within each one of these 6 sites, Scott located 10 100-meter square plots and sampled these plots for ticks. He did it by using what's called drag sampling or flag sampling. This takes advantage of the fact that black-legged ticks they're not big movers. They don't follow carbon dioxide trails, things like that. They simply quest. They stand on their hind many legs and they push out a couple more legs and they just wait for something to brush by. So usually it's an animal or a person or something. In this case, we have these big 1-meter square pieces of white corduroy, and you drag it or flag it past. And he did timed counts in each one of these 10 meters to 100-meter square plots. So I think it was 10 minutes exclusive of counting time, removing ticks. And he found, he did this 3 times during the year, repeatedly at each site. And he did it during the nymphal peak in the spring, during the larval peak in the late summer, and then again at the adult peak in the fall. And what he found was, as I said, kind of what we expected. Here in all these graphs, the vertical axis is the number of ticks, mean number of ticks found per quadrat, per 100-meter quadrat. And you can see the control sites, so that's the black locust invaded sites. For larvae, 376 was the mean number of larvae found in those sites. 13 was the mean number in the restored sites. Same with the nymphs, again, pretty dramatic difference. And again, with the adults, the same idea. He was unable to find any adults in the remediated or the restored sites. So the larvae don't transmit any of these diseases that we're talking about, so we looked exclusively at the adults and the nymphs and found a 98% reduction in the number of nymphs and adults in these sites. So it's also likely that there's going to be a reduction in the prevalence of Lyme disease in these sites, although we didn't test the ticks. It's likely that the prevalence would be reduced because the primary reservoir for Lyme disease, which is the white-footed mouse, doesn't really do that well in open habitats. Again, it's a forest species. It gets outcompeted by other small mammal species in open grassland kinds of habitats. It's there, but it's much smaller presence. So although we didn't quantify that, I think if we had, we would find an even greater reduction in disease risk than we already found. So the cost of restoration, and these we have Neil Gifford and the folks at the Pine Bush Preserve to thank for coming up with all these numbers. You all know they go in, they cut down the black locust trees, they clear the stumps, they clear the trees, remove the stumps, regrade, they disc the soil, all sorts of stuff, and that costs quite costly, $5,000 per acre. After that, all the other costs that go into this, planting, permitting, seed collection, planting of the seeds, monitoring, this kind of first year maintenance, where they go in and, what do they call it, clip and drip. All that costs about $323 per acre. And there are, at the time, this was, that we started calculating this, which was, I think, 2009, 2008, there were 556 acres that had yet to be restored. So they were still dominated by black locust. And so we just multiply this out. And we have an initial upfront cost of $2.96 million for the cost of restoring the habitat. Of course, restoring it and then leaving it alone would not work. Before long, you all know this, before long it would become reinvaded with black locust or some other kinds of invasive species because of fire suppression. This picture, by the way, was taken accidentally by a camera that I left, a remotely triggered camera that I left. I didn't know there was going to be a fire. It was back before the email alerts. So we know that that in order to maintain this habitat, we have to burn. And the burn, on a 5-year burn cycle, of course, this is really expensive. 5-year burn cycle, we assume, is about $5,000 per acre. And we assume that burning 556 acres every year, or in a single year, is a pretty unrealistic goal. So we divided that up and assumed that 111 acres perhaps could be burned per year, so that we could be on a cycle where every single year 111 acres would be burned, which is comes out to about a little more than $500,000 per year. And then the idea of that has to be done in perpetuity, forever, as long as the habitat is going to be maintained as this savanna-like pine bush habitat. This is going to happen repeatedly. And this is where things get sort of hard, so I hand it over to my co-author, Steve Schmidt, who's going to tell you about how we calculate this stuff.
Does the next slide have the first equation? I think we'll see as we go along. So the problem now, from an economic perspective, is that we have to take this infinitely long series of costs, and we have to somehow add that up to get a finite value, which is what it's worth today. And we do this by relying on the principle of the time value of money. We would rather receive a benefit today than receive it 5 or 10 years from now. It's worth more to us to get us now because we're impatient, or because if it's a monetary benefit, if we got it now, we could invest it and draw interest on it. And so the standard problem, or the standard solution to this problem for an economist, is to discount the benefits and costs that occur in the future by a certain percentage each year, and then take advantage of the mathematical trick that you probably got taught back in about 10th grade somewhere, that a decreasing infinite series, a geometrically decreasing infinite series, adds up to a finite value. So we're going to put that piece of math to use to solve this problem by using, here's the formula. The present value of an amount is equal to the annual amount, which is our $500,000 per year, divided by 1 plus r to the n power, where n is the number of years left until you get that value. R is your discount rate. We choose a disciplined, fairly standard value of 3% for the discount rate per year. And then we can add up this sequence of present values, and we will get a finite answer, which comes down to this. If you assume $5,000 of maintenance burns, which is the figure we have to work with, that'll be $0.556 million per year. The infinite sum at a 3% discount rate will add up to a present value of $19.089 million, plus those initial costs give us a grand total of today's dollars, all the costs of both initially remediating and doing the maintenance on this 5-year cycle perpetually. This is what it's going to cost, just a hair over $22 million. And the question is, are we going to get some kind of economic benefits that are going to justify expending this much money to remediate the preserve? Well, as Mr. Kathleen has said, the thing that we're particularly interested in this case is the Lyme disease. And in order to ask, does the reduction of disease justify spending that much money, we have to know two things. First of all, how many cases of Lyme disease are we going to avoid if we remediate in this way? How many infected ticks don't bite somebody as a result? And the second thing is, how much money is it worth to save one case of Lyme disease? The latter point, what is a disease worth, is easier to answer, although still not very easy. Lyme disease can be treated early. Lyme disease, it's really good to catch early, as probably many of you know. If you can get it before it disseminates, it's a course of antibiotics, and you can probably be pretty well cured. If it disseminates, or at secondary or tertiary levels of the disease, you can get cardiac and neurological and orthopedic problems, which can plague you for a decade and can be very expensive to treat. And the real question of what does this disease cost to treat depends on how often you deal with these complications. You deal with them rarely, 1%, 2%, 3% of the time, but the difference between 1% and 3% almost triples the value of avoiding the disease. So there's going to be some error bars on our estimates of what it saves to not have one person get Lyme disease, mostly driven by uncertainty about the probabilities of developing these rare but very expensive complications. I want you to know that we use lots of numbers, and I'm going to show you all those numbers, but not actually talk about them very much. But what are the chances that you go through various sequences of the disease? What are the chances that you get complications in these? What is the chance that you have a reaction to the antibiotics? We drew on the literature, there's a long medical literature on this. Meltzer and Mays were the two papers that were most easily mapped onto the problem. We did cross-check this with some other surveys as well. There are also indirect costs. Not only do you have to be treated, but you've lost some work time. You have to be tested. You will lose some time on the job if you have to deal with these prolonged symptoms. The costs of those things are also in there. One thing that's not in there is the value of the pain and suffering you will have from having to deal with this disease, or just with the fear factor. Even if I don't get Lyme disease, I'm just happier knowing it's not there. Those costs are not included here. We're only looking at the direct and indirect medical expenditures of treating this disease. Anyway, when you get through all the numbers, this is the punchline. We get a mean figure of about $8,500. It is worth about $8,500 to not get Lyme disease on average, because on average it will cost you about this much to treat a case. That's a lot of cases that respond well to antibiotics only cost a few $100s to treat. Some cases can cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to treat if you get very bad and very prolonged symptoms. This is the average. Depending on those error bars, it could go down to 5.5, it could go up to 11.5. We'll do some calculations that involve both the upper end and the lower end of the range. But that's what it takes. If you save one case of Lyme disease, it's this. Of course, this is also going to go in perpetuity, so we have to put these in present value terms as well. If we can save one case of Lyme disease every year in perpetuity, then that's worth $287,000 with the mean value, and the range is from $192,000 to $383,000. So we've got a get a factor of 2 range here. But that's not bad for some of this kind of stuff. All right. How many cases do we avert if we remediate the pine bush? The answer is we have no idea, because we don't know how many people get bitten in the pine bush preserve every year. We don't ask. What's reported to the government is the number of cases in Albany County, but I believe what's reported is where the disease, where you reported it, which may or may not be where you got it. If you may have, you live in Albany County, but you may have traveled to Massachusetts and gotten bitten there, or you may live in Syracuse, but you came to visit the pine preserve, you got bitten here, but you reported your infection in Syracuse. So all we really know is that, and even here we also have it only aggregated to the county. We know how many infections were reported in Albany County in 2008. I think it was 634. 638, we'll get the exact number a little bit later. 638, but we do have it here. What we simply do not know is how many of these occurred in the Pine Bush Preserve. So we're going to go the other way around. We're going to say, well, we know we've got $22 million in costs that we have to justify. We know it's $287,000 per case averted. How many do we need to cut to justify it purely with the Lyme disease risk? Well, if you use our mean value for the value of averting one disease per year every year, 75 infections per year is enough to completely justify the remediation costs. That would be about 12% of the total infections reported in Albany County. Is it plausible that 12% of the tick bites that are in Albany County are occurring in the pine bush? We don't know. We just don't know. On the one hand, a lot of people come through the pine bush, 100,000 a year. On the other hand, they're not here all year. They're here for a few hours. On the other hand, much of Albany County is paved. You're not getting a whole lot of tick bites down on State Street. The pine bush is clearly a very high-risk location within Albany County. But mostly what we can tell you is 75 tick bites within a range of 56 to 115 is enough to justify the remediation costs. How many, do that many actually occur? We have some intuition because we know the infection rate, we know how many visitors come, but we can't say more precisely whether this is or is not enough. But at least we can give you the break-even figure. Now, of course, there are other reasons to remediate the pine bush preserve other than to avert Lyme disease, and it's a nice one, but we would like to preserve the species that live there. We would like to preserve the biological diversity that this niche offers us. And there are a set of fairly standard techniques for trying to figure out what that kind of biodiversity is worth. You do a contingent valuation survey, you go ask people, how much are you willing to pay? What value do you place on this in order to preserve it? What would you be willing to pay to keep this? Well, it's very difficult to measure. You have to do surveying, so you have survey techniques. You have to kind of explain to people what number it is you want them to give you. They themselves may not know very much exactly what this thing is worth to them. But it has some value, and we'll make some attempt to quantify that. And to whatever extent the costs of restoration are partly justified because of the innate value of preserving the pine bush preserve, then if that isn't enough to justify the remediation by itself, then disease reduction can make up the balance. So that's what we tried to do here. And what we do is we simply ask a group of people, we interviewed people who live within 3 houses of the Pine Bush Preserve. And Scott prepared a postcard survey. I'll show you the actual card he sent out in a second. And asked people to return his card saying, you know, what is this worth to you? How much would you be willing to pay every year, it's going to go on your tax bill, to protect the species, to protect the clean air and the water, and to do the flood control? What's it worth? So this is the statement that he makes, and you're supposed to circle an amount, 10 cents, 50 cents, $1, up to 200 or more than 2. Nobody selects more than 200. I think 0 was on the card too, although I'm not, it seems to have gotten left off the slide. What would you be willing to pay? Well, 90% of the people don't respond to the card. You get a 10.4% response rate. So to be conservative, we assume that if you didn't return the card, it wasn't worth anything to you. That's the lowest value we can impute. So that's a conservative assumption to make sure we don't overestimate the value of the biodiversity. The other question is, how many people are getting value? Well, technically, everybody's ever seen a butterfly. In practice, the closer you live to the preserve, probably the more this is worth to you, either because you see it every day or just because the kind of people who live close to the preserve are probably the kind of people who appreciate it. How many people are going to benefit from this? Well, we made 2 assumptions, either the population of Albany County, which is 280,000 people, or the 4 zip codes that the Pine Bush Preserve in, which is 90,000 people. And we actually converted it to households, and I don't remember the household numbers off the top of my head, but about 3 people per household. The value turns out, when you take the average of our responses, the average willingness to pay for people in the preserve, to pay for the protected biodiversity is about 4.25 per household. And so you can then multiply that by the population that you have in mind, and you can figure out what the total value is, and then you offset that against the cost. Say, well, okay, of our 22 million cost, we've justified 5 or 6 or 10 million by preserving the value of the preserve, and then the Lyme disease has to cover the other 17 or 16 or 11 million. So here's the baseline. If we assume biodiversity had no value, these are the numbers of infections we would have had to prevent to justify the remediation costs. If we assume the relatively small zip code population enjoys benefits from having the Pine Bush Preserve for its ecological diversity, those numbers drop by about 1/3, quarter to 1/3. So we need only 57, 42 to 87 infections averted. If we assume that the population of the county benefits from the biodiversity, and we use that larger population, then we can get it down to 11 to 22, mean value of 14. This number, I think, is probably, there's got to be 15 people getting bitten in the Pine Bush Preserve every year. Not that I know, I've only been in there a couple of times. I think with these numbers, it's almost a no-brainer to say that this preservation is valuable. If you assume no value on the biodiversity, then it's harder to justify, but that's implausible. Clearly, we all know that preserving the pine bush has some social value. Here's a middle range. This is what the science lets us tell you. But at some point, we have to say, well, we just have to go based on our intuitions about what the number of disease, tick bites that are actually happening in there might be. So what does this mean? Well, kind of from a scientific perspective, the main thing is anytime you're going to restore an area that humans are using, you should think about all of the consequences that the human experience with that ecological niche is going to produce, and one of those is you can get diseases. And in this case, where the remediation also reduces that risk, and where Lyme disease is a big thing, not just medically but politically, you should absolutely include that value in your assessment of whether the remediation is valuable. And in particular, since cost of illness studies are relatively precise, it's easier to qualitatively, plausibly work out what it's worth to avoid a case of Lyme disease than it is to figure out what it's worth to preserve a blue butterfly. And so you may politically find that this type of stuff is more easily defended in a political debate about the value of remediation. And that's another reason why you want to include these benefits. It's maybe easier in some sense to justify a remediation to the lay audience by saying you can worry less about Lyme disease, and you can show that that really is a genuine value to the community to reduce this population of ticks that carry this disease. And I think that's what we want to stop. We want to thank Neil Gifford from the Pine Bush Preserve for a great amount of assistance. We want to thank Union College Summer Research Fellowships who funded Scott's initial work on the project. You have an NSF grant, that's why that says KL there, because that means that you know what it's all about. And Neil Gifford gave us a lot of pictures, including all these cute little ticks that are wandering all over our slides. And we thank everybody who contributed to the work we've done here today. That's that.
People have questions for Dr. LaJudas or Dr. Schmidt?
It doesn't affect your results, but did you consider asking the question, how much would you pay to reduce the tick population in Albany County? As opposed to how much would you pay to ensure clean water, air, et cetera, which, I mean, I would pay many, many thousands to preserve. And
Yeah.
The way the question is phrased comes up with
That was, yeah, it was actually the original contingent valuation survey. We didn't think of the cost of illness studies until later, actually until after Scott had graduated. Originally everything was based on a contingent valuation survey, and it had two parts. One was, how much would you be willing to pay to reduce your Lyme disease risk? And the other was, how much would you be willing to pay to preserve biodiversity? And we decided ultimately for the final version of this that the Lyme disease reduction contingent valuation survey was redundant to the cost of illness survey. We couldn't tease apart the two difference. Do you remember what the numbers were? The whole thing, it was ridiculously overpaid. I mean, the benefits ridiculously outweighed the costs if you considered both the cost of biodiversity and the cost of, although it depended upon what your population was and everything. There's so many, there's so much spread here, but it was less than they would pay for biodiversity, as I recall.
Yeah, it was less than the biodiversity figures. Part of the difficulty is that my willingness to pay to reduce my Lyme disease risk includes my pain and suffering, my fear factor, but it does not presumably include any medical expenses I would incur that my insurance company is going to pay for, because that's not my money. So the cost of the disease and my willingness to pay to avoid the disease overlap in the medical costs that I will pay, but the medical costs that my insurance company will pay are my insurance company's problem. And the things that I dislike about Lyme disease that are not attributable to medical costs are not in the cost of disease. We spent a little bit of time trying to figure out if there was any way that we could kind of come up with a unified factor, and we came to the conclusion that it was better, since the cost of illness numbers have a certain degree of solidity. I won't say they're solid, you can see they've got this factor of 2 range, but at least I can tell you what the range is. Yeah. And we decided that keeping that pure was probably the better way to do the science. I remember it was on the same order. We did a check to make sure that the cost of illness disease studies and the willingness to pay from the contingent valuations were at least in the same order of magnitude, so that it was plausible. And they were within the same order. They were within a factor of 2, something like that. Given the roughness of the survey techniques, we wouldn't have expected to do much better than that anyway. But you know, if the illness disease had been 100 times bigger or 100 times smaller than what the contingent survey valued, so we would have started over. Something would have been wrong. But they were close enough to survive the lab test.
Other questions?
one more. Has your graduate student come down with Lyme disease?
No. Send him to Colorado.
Now he's in Colorado, so he's
Talk
okay.
about a high-risk individual. I'll count salmon or I'll count eagles, but asking me to work for a minimal amount of money to count ticks, it's not going to happen.
I don't know if you noticed what he was wearing. He was wearing neck to ankle white.
He had a Tyvek suit on.
I hear you, but it's still not going to happen.
Yes, I know. People think, oh my gosh, what's spilled out there when they see him coming, yeah. You'd be amazed. It's easy to get people to do that, to do this. We hire many people every year. And we don't pay them a lot, and they still do it. It's shocking.
And he's got his neck exposed. He better not be too high up in the...
He was also, the mosquitoes really loved him too. He would come out just completely covered with mosquito bites. He was a masochist. And smiling.
Yeah, good student.
That's great. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you again for coming in and taking the time. Really appreciate it. It's a great presentation. Really interesting. I'm glad we got a little coverage of the Times Union on it too.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so
Very exciting.
thanks again.
Okay, final order of public business before we go back to executive session. Actually, we have to come out of executive session to do our final business with adjournment.
Right.
We need to take up a resolution that arises from the executive session to authorize the payment of step increase to the executive director and staff beginning with the period of April 2010 going forward.
Just the executive director.
Just the executive director, right. It's already been paid to the staff.
Right.
So
The board makes the decision.
But we were going to validate the staff, so that's why the two.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, good. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Is there someone who will offer that resolution and second it?
I will.
Second.
Okay. All in favor of adopting that resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that resolution is adopted unanimously. We do have one matter of additional business to address in executive session, which we'll do. And then when we're finished with that, we'll come back out of executive session and adjourn and announce future meetings. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, and thank you for waiting for those who returned. We've completed the executive session portion of the agenda. All that remains is to address future meetings in the following months. We've got a meeting on September 15th, December 15th, and on March 15th, and that's it for this fiscal year. Each of those meetings beginning here at the Discovery Center at 9:30 a.m.
Did we get a motion to go back into the regular session?
That's right.
So moved.
Second.
Do I need to restate that?
No.
Okay.
Just as long as we're back in regular
Okay.
session.
Okay. Thank you for your attendance, and have a great summer, and we'll see everybody in the fall.
Then we need a motion to adjourn.
All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.